That's exactly why he met with Putin on Friday in Alaska. And that's why he met with Zelensky and several leaders from other European nations today in Washington, D.C. A meeting that comes after several officials from European nations, including Britain, France, and even Germany, met on Sunday to rally behind Zelensky and emphasize the need for security guarantees to protect Ukraine. Now, unfortunately, Trump and Putin didn't reach a peace deal in their summit on Friday, which was followed by a very, very brief press conference. But they still made some progress, as evidenced by today's developments in Washington. After all, Trump wouldn't meet with Zelensky unless that summit was at least somewhat productive. And that's a point which Secretary of State Marco Rubio made in an interview on Sunday.
Our goal here is to have a peace agreement to end this war, okay? And obviously we felt, and I agreed, that there was enough progress, not a lot of progress, but enough progress made in those talks to allow us to move to the next phase. If not, we wouldn't be having Zelensky flying all the way over here. We wouldn't be having all the Europeans coming all the way over here. Now understand, and take with a grain of salt, I'm not saying we're on the verge of a peace deal, but I am saying that we saw movement, enough movement to justify a follow-up meeting with Zelensky and the Europeans, enough movement for us to dedicate even more time to this. You talk about the sanctions. Look, at the end of the day, if peace is not going to be possible here, and this is just going to continue on as a war, people will continue to die by the thousands. The president has that option to then come in and impose new sanctions. But if he did this now, the moment the president puts those additional sanctions, that's the end of the talks. You've basically locked in at least another year to year and a half of war and death and destruction. We may unfortunately wind up there, but we don't want to wind up there. We want to wind up with a peace deal that ends this war so Ukraine can go on with the rest of their lives and rebuild their country and be assured that this is never going to happen again. That's the goal here. We're going to do everything possible to make that happen if it's doable. It will require both sides to make concessions. It will require both sides to get things they're asking for. That's how these deals are made, whether we like it or not.
Well said. Very, very well said. But in that same exact interview, he also emphasized the reality of achieving peace, saying that both sides will need to make concessions.
In order for there to be a peace deal, this is just a fact. We may not like it. It may not be pleasant. It may be distasteful. But in order for there to be an end to the war, there are things Russia wants that it cannot get, and there are things Ukraine wants that it's not going to get. Both sides are going to have to give up something in order to get to the table, in order to make this happen. That's just the way it is. And I mean, the sooner we accept that, that's the reality. Now, what those things are is going to be up to both sides. There's no conditions that can be imposed on Ukraine. They're going to have to accept things, but they're going to have to get things too. And so, for example, Ukraine is a sovereign country. They have a right, like every sovereign country does in the world, to enter into security alliances with other countries to prevent an invasion in the future, to prevent threats to their national security. That's not an unreasonable request. That's something that needs to be worked on. Territories will have to be discussed. It's just a fact. And there are things that maybe Russia's holding now that they're going to have to give up. Who knows? The point is, we need to create a scenario where that becomes possible, and that's why this has been so hard, because neither side up to now has been, willing to give on some of these things. But we'll see if that's possible. It may not be, but we're going to try, and we're going to do everything we can to try to achieve a peace.
Well said once again. That is the bottom line in a nutshell. And for all of those reasons, Trump spent the entire weekend urging Zelensky to surrender control of Crimea to Russia and vow to never join the security alliance NATO ahead of today's meeting. He also told Zelensky that Putin said he would freeze the combat on most of the front lines in this war in exchange for control of Donetsk, an industrial region of southeastern Ukraine that has been one of Moscow's main targets ever since this war began. The region continues to remain a very important target for Moscow as the war rages on to this day. So while these extremely complicated and fragile negotiations actively unfold, it's very important to remember what's at stake and what the alternative options are to a peace deal. As it stands, Russia currently holds about 20% of Ukrainian territory, primarily in the east and the south. Ukrainian forces are resisting Russian advances to the best of their ability, but constraints on critical resources still persist. Russian forces are also continuing nonetheless, and a Russian strike in Ukraine ahead of today's meeting between Trump and Zelensky reportedly killed at least 10 people. And among the victims was an entire family, including a toddler. Then, on top of it all, more than 20 people were also wounded, and Zelensky described these attacks as cynical and demonstrative, especially due to their timing ahead of this meeting. But regardless of the ultimate motive behind them, which seems to be pretty clear, this is the only option on the table besides making peace. Putin and Zelensky can either opt for peace and agree to certain compromises, or this battle will continue with no end in sight until somebody surrenders. A plan which will lead to even more death and destruction. And for what exactly? For what exactly are they fighting, considering that their underlying concerns can and should be addressed through negotiation? Now, here to help us answer those important questions and discuss all of the latest details are two U.S. military veterans. So here with their analysis is first, Davis Younts, a former military officer and military defense attorney, and John Vick, the executive director of Concerned Veterans for America. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Riley.
So,
good evening, Riley.
I want to start with you, Davis, actually, because everything's up in the air. It's all very fluid. We're almost a full 4 years into this battle, which is heartbreaking to see unfold. And President Trump is moving mountains right now, trying to get to a peace deal. So I want to know, what is your current assessment of the efforts from the Trump administration to end this conflict once and for all?
I am optimistic for two reasons. We saw Vladimir Putin's posturing after his one-on-one meeting with Trump in Alaska did two things. He used language like trustworthy, and it also appears like he's publicly agreeing to some sort of security agreement as long as we don't title it NATO. So the fact that President Putin is praising President Trump's efforts, is using language like trustworthy, and is willing to give up at least some type of a security guarantee and recognize that for Ukraine, I think those are huge positive steps in the right direction that at least leave options on the table for a negotiated outcome.
Very interesting. Now, John, turning to you, in your expertise, what is your assessment of the ongoing efforts from President Trump, and do you think they will be effective in the end?
No, I think it's very encouraging. Obviously, we see that Russia has much more of an appetite for negotiating terms of peace. I mean, at the end of the day, this war's been going on for 3.5 years, right? If total victory was an option for either side, we would not be having these negotiations now. This wouldn't be a conversation. So I think it's very encouraging to see Russia coming to the table, and Ukraine as well. I mean, a recent Gallup poll just recently had 69% of Ukrainians desiring peace now. Only 24% wanted to continue the fight at any cost. So to Secretary Rubio's point that you played earlier, peace negotiations like this, pretty much everybody has to give up something, but that is, worth the cost to stop the bloodshed. I mean, more blood in the dirt is not going to make things better for Russia or Ukraine.
Certainly not. And it's hard to get the exact numbers in the fog of war, but some estimates say that more than 1 million people between both countries have been killed, which is just tragic. And President Trump doesn't want to see it. I don't want to see it. I'm sure neither of you do. But sometimes these things happen. And I just want to look ahead to this peace deal. Obviously, Putin and Zelensky have different terms on their mind, and they'll have to give something up. But this whole negotiation process is really about one underlying question. I want to start with you, John, and then Davis would like your thoughts too. What is it, John, that you think Russia is really fighting for in this war?
Yeah, well, we mentioned the industrial swaths of industrial land to the east of Ukraine. That's very important strategically. I think also, at the end of the day, I guess the prospect of NATO membership for Ukraine, Russia has long viewed as a threat. Ukraine has for a long time been a source of strategic depth, both for the NATO alliance and for Russia. So the fact that Russia is even entertaining the idea of something like Article 5 security guarantees is very intriguing to me. And I would say, too, I think that the reason why that conversation is even in the ether right now is because you've seen European allies stepping up in terms of taking more charge of their own regional security, so that you don't have this option of there's no security guarantee conversation, or it's the U.S. nuclear umbrella for Ukraine. There are things in the middle now, and so the administration, the Trump administration, has fought hard to advance this conversation about flexible security guarantees throughout the region. I think it's going to be very intriguing to see how it shakes out.
Okay, interesting. Now, Davis, to you, would you agree with John's assessment, and would you like to add anything to it?
No, I think that's a great assessment, and I think that's right. The security guarantee is so important because it is a middle ground. It doesn't look like a loss for Putin to compromise on this as long as it doesn't have the NATO label, and that's powerful. And we have to understand that to the Russian people, to former citizens of the Soviet Union, NATO is the enemy. So the idea that we can come up with a compromise or we don't have it under that umbrella is a great stepping point. I think we're going to see, as details emerge from ongoing meetings, we're going to see more areas where there's potential for compromise. And also this idea of territorial swaps have come up.
Yes.
Russia has controlled the Crimea since 2014. I really don't think that's going to be something they're going to stop fighting over or give up. That's historically been Russian territory. It was only part of Ukraine when Ukraine was a satellite state of the Soviet Union. So I think that's going to be key to look at. And then there's a real question of what nuclear facilities as well as minerals and industrial facilities are going to be part of an exchange, and that really is the Donetsk, the Luhansk, and that Donbas region. How much of that will Russia retain? They have control of most of it now. I don't think they're going to keep all of it, certainly not if they're going to get Crimea and some sort of a land bridge to Crimea.
Understood. Then following up on that note, and then I do want to hear John's thoughts about this question. This calls for a lot of speculation, but I do want to sort of get your argument, Davis. So when it comes to NATO and protecting Ukraine in general, do you believe the U.S. should have any role at all in protecting Ukraine moving forward?
You know, I think that's an extremely difficult question. My default position on that is it's essentially a European question and a European problem. I think if that is a necessary requirement of peace at this point, as long as there's an end state that makes sense and is in America's best interest so that we can have a peaceful trade with Russia and other European nations, I think that's a possibility. But that's a very, very difficult question, and it does raise questions about the need and the necessity of NATO anyway. But fortunately, President Trump's already been moving us in that direction. During his first term and again during this term, he has gotten European nations to actually pay their own way when it comes to their defense, and I think that's part of it. So I think there's some interesting long-term strategic implications from how this is negotiated that may put the United States in a better position to prioritize our own border and our own security and force European allies to step up and actually be more responsible for their own security as well as Ukraine's.
Very interesting you say that. And part of the reason I ask is given the last 20 years of U.S. foreign policy craft and foreign policy making, because we've been involved in so many different conflicts at this point, Davis, directly or indirectly. It's cost us human life, it's cost us precious resources and time and trillions of dollars. And I would hate to see us sign up to be the world's protector for another state, considering the fragile nature of this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, which really goes back years, but honestly, probably centuries. So I don't want to see us get entangled in that. However, I understand from Kyiv's position that they want real guarantees of concrete protection to stop any future aggression coming from Putin. Completely understood. So on that note, John, what do you think about the idea of the U.S. at least temporarily shielding Ukraine? And then what do you think should happen in the long term?
Sure. Well, I think that the United States relationship with its NATO allies and the broader, European security umbrella, that goes back many decades, right? And so I whether it's, President Trump leading some of these negotiations, facilitating that, I think more broadly, we should be able to facilitate Europe in taking charge of its own security. But at the end of the day, that comes down to percent of GDP that they're willing to allocate, right? As soon as the second Trump administration started, there was a little bit more tough talk with our NATO allies, and you see these countries, these allies that are capable of being capable for a long time, finally stepping up and taking more charge of European security. So I think that as our allies lean into their capability, they can facilitate some of the security guarantees that maybe Ukraine is looking for. And I think that having the United States, particularly the United States president, being able to facilitate that conversation is very constructive and is also a good way for the United States to look out for its security interests in the region, right? But that doesn't mean being the grand protector of Ukraine.
Okay.
U.S. interests should come first.
Totally understood and agreed, by the way. So we'll have to see what happens. I will say this. I think President Trump is setting an excellent example for Putin and Zelensky, pushing for peace unequivocally. Whether that includes a ceasefire in the meantime, we'll see. But I wish this administration Godspeed, truly. I don't see what this war is doing for anybody. So we'll see what happens. But I'm going to be patient and keep my fingers crossed. And I want to say thank you both to you gentlemen for being here today on the show.
Thanks, Riley.
Thank you.
Left to men like Davis Younts fighting for these Navy SEALs.
Paul Davis Younts, you are an attorney who has successfully defended naval officers.
Davis Younts has been instrumental in defending
Davis Younts successfully defended an evangelical Navy lieutenant